As a child, my grandfather used to buy me books on Greek mythology, and I used to love reading them. Do you know the one about Hercules and the Hydra? So the Hydra was this huge monster with 9 heads, and every time Hercules would cut off a head, another 2 would grow in its place. And I've been thinking about how so many of the global challenges that we face have a very Hydra-like quality, even after we think we've solved them. How happy were we, the Arab countries that won political transitions in 2011, but why hasn't that achieved social and economic justice? Why, even 20 years post-apartheid, is South Africa still one of the most unequal countries in the world? Why, even though we've abolished slavery, do we still suffer from institutionalized racism and ongoing human trafficking? When I accidentally discovered social entrepreneurship in grad school, I was writing a paper on the Nobel Peace Prize, and Mohammed Yunus had just won for his microfinance bank. And one of the first lessons I learned as a social entrepreneur was you address the root causes of an issue and not the symptoms. So we don't give poor people a handout, we tackle the systemic causes of poverty. The second thing I learned was, don't worry if you don't know what you're doing, just start and let the work teach you. So I work on a number of social and environmental issues, and the work has taught me this. Our biggest global threat is our crisis of values. Think about it. Isn't the root cause of most of the issues that we face, whether it's the refugee crisis or weapons of mass destruction, the values and conditions that allowed these problems to exist in the first place? Today we consume the equivalent of 1.7 Earths. Even if we became a multi-planetary species, that doesn't change the fact that we've been living in a way that is fundamentally not conducive to life itself. Policies can be signed in seconds. Wars ended overnight. But if our activism doesn't plant the societal values to sustain that shift, our issues will just regenerate like the Hydra. Do you remember the summer of 2014? It was a really depressing summer. Between the Hamas-Israel war and this sudden rise of Daesh or ISIS, I think a lot of us were feeling like, where is humanity? But from an intellectual point of view, because I'd been a terrorism researcher, I also remember thinking, wow, Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda actually seem moral compared to Daesh. And it's interesting because we're kind of seeing this mirrored in the emergence of a more radicalized, far-right Western leadership. The other thing I thought was, it's interesting, once bin Laden was described as a mild-mannered man. He was the one who resolved family conflicts, which were inevitable because he had more than 20 siblings. When we pursue what we believe to be moral outcomes, and we use immoral means, we forget that the means doesn't justify the ends, and that's what happens when we're not grounded in values. And we often recognize this in wars that are fought for the protection of freedom and human rights and then violate those very principles. But what we don't often recognize is the possibility that we might embody what we're fighting in our own activism. So if our activism is adversarial and we're fighting for inclusion, but then we're marginalizing the ones who are doing the excluding, we forget that the means doesn't justify the ends. The means is the end. And I have a bit of an inner struggle because in the work I do, I want to be taken seriously. So I've been conditioned to always give the value proposition of why doing good is good for business and it's good for the economy. And I understand we need to be pragmatic, but if the means is the end, can you see why it might be problematic if we only plant seeds of a self-serving form of justice? So what seeds do we plant to overcome our Hydra-like challenges, the ideal means and end, something that could transcend race, religion, political beliefs, open us up to valuing each other, this earth, ourselves, and ideally, something that is inherently in human nature? Compassion. And yes, I know that we don't typically associate compassion as being Darwinian, and I'll let you look that up later. But what do we mean by compassion? Because we think we're driven by compassion, but what does that actually mean? So there's a parable about the Buddha, who in one of his past lifetimes was a ferryman, and he was transporting 500 saints, and a thief jumps aboard the ship to kill the saints and steal all of their belongings. And you know, the ferryman's first thought is, if the thief kills the saints, he will suffer terribly in hell. If I kill him first, not only do I save the saints, but I will save him from this awful karma. And my suffering won't be as bad as his. How often are we that indiscriminate in our compassion? And I'm not saying we overlook justice, but looking beyond victim and perpetrator, us and them. And what can sometimes be even harder than that, and it has been for me, is having compassion for ourselves. So if compassion is in our true nature, and it's such a powerful antidote, then surely we recognize the value of actively cultivating generations of compassion. So I was looking at some of the world's largest foundations and humanitarian and environmental organizations, and do you know what surprised me? Many of them don't even mention values on their websites. And when they do, it's typically in the context of operational values, so how we do our work, as opposed to the values that we need to cultivate in ourselves and in society in order for the issues that we're tackling not to exist. So if we recognize that the problem is not just that our problems exist, but the values and conditions that led to them in the first place, then we need to promote 21st century values and not only 21st century skills. That is the very foundation of sustainable development. I don't think any of us would hesitate to say that the combination of advanced technological intelligence with a low IQ is a really bad idea. But how often do we consider the imbalance between advanced technological intelligence and lower spiritual intelligence? With all the brain and heart power in this room, I know you see the world not just as it is, but how it could be. We have all the technology and resources we need to address most of the issues that we're facing today. What we're lacking is the values. Our progress as humanity has always been due to that limitless moonshot thinking that has continuously enabled us to exceed our perimeters of possibility. Is it more far-fetched that we're striving to become a multi-planetary species, yet unthinkable that we would brave a global evolution of consciousness? Let me ask you, what could the world look like if each one of us, no matter what field we were in, cultivated these seeds of compassion? And most importantly, what will it look like if we don't? Thank you.